As sad singing and slow walking, as the Dream Machine would say. Be ready to be laid out and have words spoken over you.
A lot of people are going to be talking about the Dream Machine in the months ahead.
He's going to make a resurgence.
That's right.
Based on, we're not here to just plug my book right off the top of the bat. The big announcement, the incredible revelation that in the last 6 months to keep myself from going batshit nuts over everything else going on in the wide, wide world these days, I have sat down and created a masterpiece, a piece of merchandise that's going to go on sale at jimcornette.com on October 11th, since we're just blurting out all the details here, Saturday, October 11th at noon Eastern. My new book, Heroes and Friends, with extensive essays, remembrances is what they are, on a variety of great wrestling superstars that I have interacted with. And Brian, you have seen an advance copy of this adventure, and it ain't too bad for a guy in his spare time, from what I'm being told by you. It's for government work. It ain't too bad for government work, as they used to say.
I could say I think people are going to really like it. I think people are going to love the articles. But the thing that has blown me away, and I think people are going to see this, is the photography. And specifically, there are some of your photos that I'm familiar with, that have been around. Other people have seen them too. They may not realize they're your photos, but they've been around, and you have reproduced them in the highest possible quality. It blew me away. And I think people are going to love it.
I don't want to give the people the idea that just every single picture in the thing is mine. We have some historic and some classic stuff too, and stuff that people haven't seen in 50, 60 years, even before I was born, and rare things like that. But some of the photography, specifically the chapters on Lance Russell and the chapters on Troy Graham, the Dream Machine, who was as I sat down and wrote it and laid it all out, was a pivotal person in my career early, before I had a career. But nevertheless, back to Lance. You and I were looking at it, and we've been talking about this, and this is something that we'll see in a variety of projects I hope to be doing coming up. But specifically, the first look is in this book. Hotchkiss Featherbottom has been able to take my negatives, and we talked about this the other day on The Experience. The state of the art of photo printing in the last 45 years has changed a little bit. And I was gobsmacked. I actually have one of the famous pictures of Lance Russell and Dave Brown at the desk in Memphis in the TV studio was one that I took. And I have the print, 3.5 by 5 print from 45 years ago. And I have an 8 by 10 enlargement from 45 years ago. And I have the original negative. And what they can do now with the negative, Hotchkiss was able to reproduce this in such high res and then turn around and put it into this printing program. It looks like completely different photo. And another one of Lance that we were looking at just earlier before we went on the air, you can see one of the gold molars in his mouth. And I was using, for anybody that's a 60-year-old photographer, 400 speed Kodak color film with a Canon AE1 and a 125 millimeter telephoto lens in a TV studio, which sounds great. But when you got the print back in those days, it wasn't capable of reproducing what the negative had recorded. And now they are. And you can eliminate dust and smudges and whatever. It's insane. So anyway, since we got that plug in, Bobby Heenan, the Sheik, Bruno Sammartino, Ray the Crippler Stevens, the Dream Machine, Paul Bearer, Vader, Sputnik Monroe, Lance Russell, Ron Wright, Boo Bradley, a.k.a. Balls Mahoney, and my favorite chapter, the Green Shadow, Pat Malone. We're going to find out a lot of stories have been on here. Some haven't. Some are the product of the research I've been doing over the last year, and even stuff I found out a bit in Notre Dame. And as if all the Sputnik stories are there, but you and I were talking about, we believe we have a photo that I didn't know it. I knew the story of his interaction with Sam Phillips's sons, Knox and Jerry, Sam Phillips, the founder of Sun Records, who discovered Elvis, Knox and Jerry and their friend, who became the Memphis radio legend, Johnny Dark, were the leaders of Sputnik's fan club in Memphis in the early 60s. And I tell the story of how Sputnik almost got Jerry Phillips stabbed when he was 12 years old by a mad fan in Arkansas. But we have a picture reproduced in that chapter of two of the kids that I just thought was his random fan club members. And you believe it may be at least one of Sam Phillips's kids.
Yeah, I think it's Sam Phillips's son with the other co-president of the fan club. We'll find out during the break. We'll somehow get confirmation on this age-old story in a few minutes.
We'll have Freddie DeCordova, the producer, get back to us in the break over here. And but anyway, so that is, again, only $24.95 an autograph, folks. 100 pages on all of these people and my interactions with them and all kinds of shit you ain't never seen before for the wrestling fan for Christmas. But in a related matter, as I was researching some of these people and their schedules and the things that happen, and Brian, we've talked about how the Nashville wrestling promotion of Nick Gulas and Roy Welch is based in Nashville, Tennessee. It acquired the Memphis end of the territory in 1957. Memphis had been its own separate city affiliated with the St. Louis and the Tulsa offices, had its own promoter, and they hadn't used any of the other Tennessee talent. So Gulas and Welch had set up Nashville as a weekly town. The Hippodrome, they seat 3,000 people a week, most time did. And every week was Chattanooga, 140 miles to the southeast. In the Memorial Auditorium, seated 5,000 or 6,000, and often did. And Birmingham, Alabama was 180 miles south of Nashville. It still is, as a matter of fact. They hadn't moved it. And that was every week as well. That was their main territory. And the spot shows in the small towns around Huntsville, Florence, Alabama, and in different places in Tennessee. When they got Memphis, in effect, instead of just getting one town, they kind of added a different territory to their auspices, because Roy Welch, living in Dyersburg, which is just about 75 miles north of Memphis, right? He had sat and waited. He lived there, and they had towns, small towns all around the area with their wrestlers. He just sat and waited to get Memphis, and they finally did. But they kept it separate. And Roy, as we've always told the story, Roy oversaw Memphis, whereas Nick was fond of Birmingham, his hometown, and they were both on Monday nights. So that was how that Memphis was always kind of the outsider town that got all the attention still in the territory, because they had the big building. The Ellis Auditorium at that time was bigger than could potentially be bigger when they, used all the seats. Then the other buildings in the territory, they had a big TV and a lot of towns around it, right? So would you like to know, Brian, or would you like to take a guess, if you lived in Memphis, Tennessee in 1961 and you were a fan of professional wrestling, do you know how many times per week, if you were willing to drive 90 miles, that you could see live pro wrestling matches?
Well, again, I'm not too big on knowing how much mileage there is between different towns, but I'm going to guess, based on the fact that you're asking this question,
yes,
I'm going to say 6 or 7 days.
Oh, God damn it. You son of a bitch. Well, would you like me to actually more than that? But you couldn't be in two places at the same time. But would you like me to elaborate on this? Because this is, again, in this day and age, when, live events, I mean, again, the WWE draws major crowds, but they only come to a city of 3 million people like Chicago twice a year. Did I just undercut Chicago? Maybe it's 10 million now. I don't know. But you know what I'm saying. These were the old days when you were going to small markets and doing it the old-fashioned way. In 1961, or at least part of it, for the time period covered in this program, they were inviting you to come to all of the matches that ran and were promoted off Memphis TV. And on Monday nights, obviously, that was wrestling in Memphis, right? Back then at the Ellis Auditorium. But they also had a deal. Herb Welch ran Blytheville, Arkansas as a weekly town. I've seen ads that I've uncovered up to the early 70s. And Herb was the big name of the Welch brothers in the ring. Roy was the promoter, but Herb had a long career as a top baby face, but he didn't quit wrestling until he was like 60-something. And he was the salty old bastard that trained guys like David Schultz out in West Tennessee, stretching them in his barn, right? So he ran Blytheville, Arkansas, I think at the Legion Arena. And even in the 70s, they were charging like $2 ringside and $1 general admission or some shit for 2 single matches and a tag. So they would run Blytheville, Arkansas on Monday nights also at that time. And that's, again, one of the old spot shows for Memphis TV, 70 or 80 miles across the city of Memphis sits on the Mississippi state line. So you can drive south 10 miles from downtown Memphis and be in the state of Mississippi. But if you cross the river, cross the Mississippi Bridge, or across the Mississippi River, across the bridge, you're into Arkansas. And you're not far from the boot heel of Missouri. So that's why that Memphis TV hit portions of 3 or 4 different states. On Tuesday night, they'd do a regular weekly show in Kennett, Missouri. Again, as an old Memphis town in the 80s that Buddy Wayne would run. But this was weekly on Tuesday nights. And Wednesday in those days, they were both running Jackson, Tennessee, which is 80 miles from Memphis up the road toward Nashville, and Clarksdale, Mississippi, which is about 70 or 80 miles kind of in a southerly direction from there. Thursday nights was Tupelo, Mississippi. I don't know where they were running. I can't believe the building we were running in the 80s could have been standing that long. And then on Saturdays, they did their TV at WHBQ, Channel 13, even though it aired late afternoon in those days, they would tape it in the studio at noon so that they could then go to Jonesboro, Arkansas, which is 75 miles away. Of course, known now worldwide as the birthplace of Randy Hales, on Saturday nights and do a weekly show there. It was
be a good sign.
Literally.
Randy Hales hails from here.
Randy Hales from here. They had their own territory off one TV, and they could keep the guys busy that were living in Memphis every week, 5 or 6 times. And plus bring in, obviously, they were still bringing in some of the stars from the other end of the territory, but Sputnik Monroe was a main event guy. And I don't know that he ever worked in Nashville on that run. 200 miles up the road.
Hey, a couple questions for you. One, when would you say Memphis became the priority Monday night town? Because obviously Nick Goulas had a different town that was a priority. At what point did it become the priority?
Well, it depends on.
Or did it not become that until Jerry Jarrett broke away?
No. I think it was always Roy Welch's priority. I think it was because they gave it a ton of opportunities, and he switched things up quite a bit. They paid, from what I understand now, $30,000 for it, allegedly. And that was in, Jesus Christ, what was that? That would be $300 and something thousand.
To Les Wolf?
To Les Wolf. But then they still used him as a front man a time or two. And they tried different things. You go back and look, they had Gorgeous George came in 1958, and the newspaper publicity also mentioned that night lower prices for the summer. They had lowered prices on Gorgeous George. Memphis wrestling, and this is talked about in the article in more detail, but Buddy Wayne, the Memphis guy years ago, was there. He had just had his first professional match like 2 months before the Sputnik Monroe Billy Wicks match at Russwood Park that popped the whole thing. And he said wrestling in Memphis was dead and Sputnik Monroe saved it. And you can see where some of the shows, they were skipping weeks. Some shows didn't draw 1,000 people in Memphis at the Ellis Auditorium. And then Roy Welch takes over. Spring of 57, by the end of 58, I mean, there's nothing in the papers like, oh, anything's happening or interesting. It's just a drab results. And then he brings Buddy Fuller in from Mobile, where his son, Buddy Fuller, had opened. That's what the Welches did. They opened territories. He'd opened up Mobile, and he got two guys over named Sputnik Monroe and Billy Wicks. So he brings Buddy up to be the front promoter and the booker. And then Billy Wicks and Sputnik Monroe show up. And of course, by then, I don't know if it was a year later, Buddy Fuller was out because he got in trouble with the commission. Like it seemed like he had a problem with the Tennessee State Athletic Commission over a period of years with paying the commission taxes. They were not fans of his. But by then, they had things going, and I think Roy just took over fully. But the point is, Sputnik Monroe appears, and in 3 months, the newspaper said, we have the largest wrestling crowd in Memphis in 5 years. And then the largest wrestling crowd in Memphis in almost 10 years. And then by the summertime, they're doing regular shows in a ballpark and drawing. Well, Sputnik drew the two biggest crowds in Memphis wrestling history in the same month. So whatever he was doing, it worked.
And when did TV start?
TV, they had gotten TV not long after Roy bought the town in 57. They got it first on Channel 5. And historically, a guy named Jack Eaton was the announcer. He was a Memphis sports legend, still with Channel 5 in the 80s. But then it didn't last, whatever. We don't know. More to come. But they ended up on Channel 5, or on Channel 13, I'm sorry, and that's where Lance Russell worked and was serendipitously the only guy that had ever done wrestling because he had done a little studio show they had done in Jackson, Tennessee a few years earlier.
Yeah, and I have a lot of the programs covering that period of time where they got the TV, when they moved TV, I guess I should say, and I'm a big collector of those programs, and I have almost a complete year of 59. If anyone has any, let me know. I need to complete my set. But if I think of the end of the 50s, early 60s, Memphis, I've seen some other programs from various towns throughout the Gulas Welch area. But when you bring up all the different shows within 90 miles of Memphis, if you had to guess, how many of those shows were 3 matches?
Most of them. Most of them, that's what they had in those days. And oftentimes, the first match would be 1 fall, and then the last 2 would be 2 out of 3. Sometimes all 3 would be 2 out of 3 falls. You'd still get your 2-hour show, but the expenses were low, as they say. And then, actually, I think, do you remember? You've seen the lineup there, but at Russwood Park, if there was 4 matches on the card, that would have been big, and
an intermission.
They drew, and an intermission, and they drew almost 14,000 people, and they tore the fucking fence down, and got in after they locked the gates. So that's the thing, is these guys had to get over in rudimentary, conditions, but Sputnik made a difference. He instantly, and in the book, there's newspaper articles that tell the story of, his encounter with the cowboy and the arrests and the civil rights situation. But he was all over the place for almost 2 years, but especially that summer of 59. And then, it ends up, honestly, that the city, but they just had a Sputnik Monroe Day. And they had another one. The first one was 20 years ago, but that was still the one place where he could go, where they still remembered, where he was still the diamond ring and Cadillac man, right? Because everywhere else, I mean, he had been a security guard in the 80s, so they had long forgotten. But Memphis, he could always come and pull that same suit out of the closet and, and be thought of the way he used to be. All off of that one summer. It's incredible.
It's interesting too. There's never another summer. For Sputnik, I guess you could say, correct me if I'm wrong, he really isn't a political player in that office going forward. Him and Fargo apparently didn't get along. There's not a lot of big runs of Sputnik after that, and Billy Wicks. He eventually goes, whatever it is, the sheriff's department, or you would know better than I.
Well, that was the thing, is that the other lost part of the equation was Billy Wicks. But he, after, I think, another year or two, went full-time with the sheriff's department and still wrestled on those towns on the weekends, closer to Arkansas and Mississippi, just to stay, in the business. And he was a shooter, competitive wrestler, and trained guys until his, 80 or whatever.
Had you met him before you brought him to the Smoky Mountain Night of Legends?
No, because see, he had been out at that, not only at that end before that end became Jarrett's end, but he'd been out of the business for so long. But the old timers, still remembered him. But that's why nobody does, because he went, instead of sticking with the business and being integrated into the full Tennessee territory then in the 60s and getting on more TVs and wrestling more places, he just worked for the sheriff's department and did those other things and wrestled on weekends for a while through, I guess, the end of the 60s.
Well, we could do this all day.
We could do this all day.
It's a lot of fun. Once again, when's the new book go on sale?
Saturday, October 11th at noon Eastern at JimCornette.com, along with action figure discounts and more excitement, a couple of more new things going on, and various other holiday cheer. We start our holiday sale in October, so we got time to keep up with it, folks. So, and I hope you like this book, because we've talked about the pictures and shit, but I wrote it too, and goddamn, that took longer even. I'm proud of that too.
Once again, JimCornette.com. Learn more about Sputnik Monroe and so many other important figures.